bingo, what's name?
And you weigh the right things on the right side and the wrong things on the wrong side.
Cosine equals 87 divided by 105, the square root of 105.
I mean, I can't always be their little girl.
Play is basically learning. Children learn a tremendous amount when they play.
Play is what children do, whether they're playing with peers, whether they're playing with objects, whether they're playing with adults.
Whoa!
It's on the other side.
Play prepares children for adult roles.
Very well.
I'm going to get a hotel. Mom, I'm going to get a house on mine.
Play is where the action is and where you test your character out constantly against opponents or just against objects.
All the conditions for self-esteem exist in play.
Aim, height, aim, height. Ah, I got one, I got one, I got one. I got one.
It's what children are inclined to do if left alone and comfortable.
Play. It seems to fill the life of the young child.
He's in pretend.
But what exactly is play?
We're going to pretend as well, but it's hard to say.
Is it for learning, for growth, or just for fun? To answer such questions, researchers investigate children's play from a variety of angles.
They're experimenting with the world. They're experimenting with objects. They're experimenting with ideas. And when they play, they also learn language. They experiment with language. They communicate their ideas.
Wow, nice.
To eat.
No, they're not to eat. She wants to know if you eat caterpillars.
No way.
I think as adults, we often go very lightly over this notion, oh, the children are playing. And in fact, peer play is very serious business. Children are learning very serious adult-like social skills. They are invested in it, they're involved in it, and these are skills that are going to stay with them for a very long time.
Play is also, interestingly, a window on cognitive development. You can watch children at different ages or children of the same age and see how they play, and they reveal their intellectual and cognitive competencies in what they do with materials. We actually have studied play well enough now that if we take, let's say, a 6 or 9 month old and follow that child through 2 years of age, we can actually watch new competencies emerge in play.
All the conditions for self-esteem exist in play, which is a fascinating thing. And that is not play that is directed by adults, not play where we control or make up the rules, but where kids play. Kids play with art, kids play with words, kids play with wood, kids play with junk, sand, the tools of childhood.
If I get to pick what I want to do, then it's play. If someone else tells me, my teacher or my mom tells me I have to do it, then it's work. And I think as adults, we probably feel this same way about the things that engage us in our lives. What we choose to do becomes important to us, and we put all the force of play into it, our emotions, our intellect, and all of our social skills.
Primates offer researchers interesting insights into the biological basis of play.
We find striking parallels with children's play and the play of primates. For example, you'll find primates spinning in circles, engaging in motor play, run fast, run chase kinds of play that you typically see in outdoor motor play with young children.
Well, amongst biologists today, the commonest thing they say about the meaning of play is that it is safe practice. And there is a theory of evolution which says that play came before language. Before language was used to moderate human affairs, play came as a way of moderating human affairs. What were human affairs? Well, if there was you and I and we were competing, one of us would kill the other. When you get play, you have play fighting, you have rough and tumbles. Somebody comes to be the boss, but he hasn't killed the others off. This seems to be the big step that play contributed to evolution, to rough and tumble. That's one of the theories.
Primates and children communicate play in similar ways. In other words, it's the play face, the smile, or the nip that is not the bite.
In other words, the little dog goes on your hand like this, is saying to you, I'm biting you, but it's also saying to you, I'm not biting you. The nip, that means the bite, but not what the bite means. A real bite means I'm going to hurt you, you know. And this is a very subtle process that Bateson talked about and has been illustrated multiple times in all kinds of areas now. And it's clearly a very important part of the growth of play. It suggests that play has a place in the communicational series of human evolution.
Don't forget you can roll around there. Ready? Go! 3, 2,
As society has changed over time, so too has children's play. From the past to the present, the very purpose of play, and therefore its effect on children's development, has changed remarkably.
The changes in play from pre-industrial times are really changes towards greater organization. There are various ways you can talk about this. Some people feel this is good because it rationalizes play instead of being wild and chaotic on the streets. And other people feel it domesticates play and takes the life out of childhood. Stephen John Locke, for example, in 1695, he was the author of Locke's Blocks, the very notion that if we could educate children, take them out of the streets where it was rough, dirty, and tempestuous, and bring them indoors and have educational toys or apparatuses which they could use and would teach them things. And that's the beginning, in a sense, of the doom of the modern child. And almost every adult ever since thinks about childhood and play as something educational. Most of the psychologists of the 20th century have increasingly talked about play as a civilizing influence. Whereas you can talk that way, as in Freud at the beginning of the century, but he's talking about very uncivilized beings struggling to get their emotional conflicts into some kind of order through their play. And so you still have in Freud, in the beginning of this century, a notion of a child or a player as a kind of animalish, rough thing. He was in touch with our baser human nature. 50 years later, with the cognitive theories of Piaget and Vygotsky and others, it's almost as if we don't have that base nature anymore, and play has to do with cognition and learning and understanding and concepts. I regard this as kind of a ridiculous development, but it means that the rational view of the imagination has won over the street view of the imagination. Freud has both of them in his grasp. Modern-day scientists of play, by and large, have got only the rationalized view of the imagination, the cleaned-up view of play, and that's one of the problems of play today.
Infants begin to play as they explore their world, and that play aids and reflects their development through childhood.
If we look at, let's say, a 6, 8-month-old, you give them a set of play materials, they'll mouth it, they'll turn it over, they'll examine it. But that's about it.
Ring, ring. Is that the telephone? Is that the telephone? Yummy.
Babies turns about 9, 10 months of age. Let's say those materials have some unique features, like there's a dial on a toy telephone, or a wheel on that toy telephone. The 9-month-old will exploit, via discovery, those unique features. They'll turn the dial. They'll rotate the wheel. A 6-month-old wouldn't systematically do that. We go a little older, maybe a 10, 11-month-old, and we can see the child starting to exploit unique properties now, but of things going together. Putting a peg in the hole. Putting the telephone receiver on top of the telephone. The baby doesn't recognize the telephone is a telephone yet, but he recognizes that there's a relation here between one piece and another piece. That kind of play development then moves into the child discovering, hey, we've got some emergent, we've got some symbolic capabilities here. This toy is a thing. This telephone is like what mommy or daddy uses that hangs on the wall of the phone. So we might see that baby pick up that telephone receiver and vocalize. It's not like the baby puts the phone to the head, crosses the knee, tilts the head and says, hello, who's there? What you'll see, baby, is baby sort of grab a phone and sort of look at it, a receiver, hold it up here, rah, rah, and vocalize. They clearly have some sense that this is not just a random object. This is a particular object that has particular meaning.
How about this? Hi. Hi, David. Sierra.
Okay, let's do it again.
Eventually that symbolic play, that rudimentary symbolic play, becomes more sophisticated, and what the child will start doing is taking these pretend objects, maybe pretend drink from a cup, pretend talk from a phone, pretend stir in a cup, and now have somebody else do it. So I'll hold the phone out to you, Mommy, and you talk. I'll put the phone over the doll, and I'll talk for the doll. Wah, 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 the doll's talking. I'll grab the doll's arm and take the spoon and stir in the cup, have the doll stirring. I've now gone from action, symbolic play around my body to action, symbolic play around somebody else's body. The next major advance we see is when the child substitutes non-meaningful objects for meaningful objects. Let's say he wants to talk on the phone, but there's no toy telephone there. But he sees a peg that he just used to put in a pegboard. His imagination goes, we're talking about an 18-month, 20-month child, picks up the peg, says, hi, Mom. He realizes the peg can be substituted to stand for that toy telephone.
Poor baby, I said, ow! Okay. Yeah. Baby, I cry. Oh, poor baby. It's a pie.
Somewhere around the ages of 4 or 5, one of the things that happens is that children actually begin to prefer what psychologists call unstructured objects. That is, they'd rather use something like styrofoam chips or rocks from the yard or poker chips or something like that to represent all the different things in their play.
The fact that their chair is really a spaceship and that they're off in the third galaxy to the east is not entirely apparent to the adult, but clearly part of the child's way of thinking about that situation.
One little tricky time.
Cognitive psychologists have been very interested in the role of this kind of play and use of imagination in fostering cognitive development. The idea that in these themes that are part of the child's play, the child has some flexibility to think about the world differently from the way it is, and to imagine relationships among things gives the child some flexibility to explore some things that they can't explore in their concrete world.
Not only does play facilitate cognitive growth, research shows it is instrumental in social-emotional development.
In the early parts of preschool, play is really a way to acquire social skills. Children figure out through playing how to start social interactions, how to keep social interactions going, the kinds of things that make sense to do and the kinds of things that don't make sense to do. Now, children, of course, have different rules about what are socially skillful behaviors than we do. Banging on the table as a young preschooler is probably a pretty social act if you can catch somebody else's eye and get them to bang as well. We parents and teachers aren't so pleased with the banging, but it is a kind of a social skill. It's a communication, and it's getting other children to join in. Once children have acquired social skills in playing, then they seem to move on to negotiating issues of compromise and control, which they work out through their play.
This kind of negotiation that happens over children's perceptions of how the world is and their idea of how the plot in play should unfold contributes to their ability to take the perspectives of other people and to negotiate conflict and cooperate.
Children have to negotiate play. Generally, what we think we're finding when we look at dyadic play of this type, we seem to think that there's one child that takes the lion's share of directing the play. and the other child cooperates. In other words, play can't continue, or high, complex social pretend play cannot continue unless the two children can negotiate the scripts or the role play.
If you've ever heard two little girls arguing about which one was going to be the mother in the house game, it seems like that argument has more to do with how children are feeling about themselves, how they're feeling about others, than exactly who's going to be the mother in the game, because it doesn't seem like it should carry so much importance. But it does for children, and children learn how to hold on to their own fantasies about how they want to play things out, at the same time compromising and being flexible so that they can have other people to play with them.
Play clearly helps develop cognitive and social skills, enabling young children to more fully participate in social interactions.
Ultimately, towards the end of the preschool period, as children move into the school ages, they begin to move into the stage of play called games with rules. And games with rules require even more symbolic distancing, in the sense that children not only have to use, say, a marker on a board game to represent a piece of the game, but they also have to represent in their mind what the whole board game, the universe that the board game represents. And they have to know that within that universe there are certain rules that operate, and in order to play the game fairly, you must follow those rules.
What color are you going to be, Robert? Blue?
That is one thing that contributes to children beginning to move from spontaneous play, which is very flexible and fluid and free form, into productive work, which is where goals are more focused, they're less flexible, and children are likely to persevere on one task as they begin to understand the nature of rules.
In our life, we have to deal with other people. And life is, in a sense, a strategic battle a lot of the time. Who's the boss, who's not, who's the follower, and all the tactics you have to use in order to get your work done in association with other people. It used to be called the team spirit in the old simple days. Well, the team spirit begins early, and it's between the ages of 4 and 7 that children learn that. And they learn it through play. Play is the only device in which they can learn flexibly what they're going to be able to do, what skills they have, what will be accepted, what won't be accepted. If you don't go through that, you're just a lemon.
What do you want to play? What do you want to pretend with these blocks? You pick a subject.
No, I want to make a house. This is their fence jump here to there to there.
Yeah. Who lives there? Any princesses?
The cat and the cows and the moose and the...
In every society, play prepares children for adult roles. Because those roles differ from culture to culture, play also differs. A study of American and Mexican mothers playing with their children provides one example.
¿Qué? Corralito.
In the American culture, we tend to stress cognitive ability and stress autonomy and self-reliance and independent thinking. And American mothers tend to sort of push those kinds of skills in the play setting, whereas in the Mexican setting, the mothers are more interested in communicating cooperation and less independent thinking, more in terms of social interaction and smooth social interaction between the mother and the child. What we see is Mexican mothers tend to be very directive in play. They tend to play in a more parallel fashion with their children. They'll make a model, then the children will imitate that model. So the mother tends to be directive in that sense. Oftentimes when there's more language involved, the mother will actually give the directions to the child about what to do with the play objects. The Anglo mothers tend to teach their children about the properties of the objects. They tend to have a child-rearing agenda whereby they want the child to learn what the colors are of the objects or what the objects are. Oftentimes mothers will also sit back and allow the child to take the first lead. Generally speaking, they'll ask, what color is the block? What does the doggy say? What color is the dog? In contrast to the Mexican mom who makes the model and then asks the child to copy that model.
Cultural values also affect gender roles, what society sees as appropriate actions for boys and girls. This too is reflected in the play and imagination of children.
Boys' stories have a characteristic that's different than girls' stories. Boys' stories tend to have high adventure and villains, and the problems that are presented in the story are generally solved by the hero coming in and taking care of the situation, vanquishing the villain. Girls' stories and girls' play, incidentally, is more apt to center around domestic themes, and girls are more likely to be rescued either by a powerful force or by magic.
Some feel that a child limiting their play and imagination to narrow gender-based roles may have developmental consequences.
In the short run, it means that children may not choose to develop potential in areas that are attractive to them. It may mean that they give up the opportunity to experience attractive activities. In the long run, it may have some effect on even their cognitive development. We know, for example, that construction toys are related to some types of visual spatial abilities. And if children inhibit their play with that type of toy, then they may be affecting their cognitive development in that area.
This limitation may also affect a child's social development.
Boys tend to avoid playing with dolls, and certainly doll play is an important source of learning nurturant behavior, learning how to care for another human being. And we might ask if boys receive as much practice in this area as might be beneficial, given that most of them will grow up to be fathers themselves.
If play is the work of children, as some have called it, are toys, TV, and games its tools? If so, what role do such objects play in shaping a child's development?
Children the first 2 years of life spend 80% of their time all by themselves playing with their toys. We have play pens, we have play rooms, we have their bedrooms fested with toys, festooned with toys and playthings. I give you this toy to love you, so that you'll know that I love you. I give you this toy to bond you to me. But then we say, now go and play with it by yourself, which is a wonderful contradiction of our life. The very loneliness has created another group of toys, all the soft toys, which have grown enormously in the last decades. And these are companion toys which help you to feel that you're not alone. And children play with these things like they're real people. Children are very anthropomorphic. Their dolls are little real people. They're not just dolls. They're not just things you learn from. They are people. They take to bed and she doesn't feel well today and all this kind of things going on all the time. It's very clear that the basic meaning of toys for most people is that they're tools. That is, tools, useful things from which educational purposes will derive. I don't happen to believe that, but that's the main belief, and it's part of the pressure on toy makers to constantly make things educational. People, when they criticize toy makers, are usually taking an extremely realistic view of what the thing is and then making criticism on those bases. A toy is not a tool. I mean, it can be, but it's not. A toy is a fiction. That's the first thing about a toy. You don't have to have the details. Once you've got it, it suggests something and off you go in a fantasied way. And if you play with it any longer, then it's because you've got the imagination. People often say, this leaves nothing to the imagination. Well, the answer to that is, if they continue playing with it, the imagination is proceeding. If it leaves nothing to the imagination, they will not play with it. You can't play with things you don't fantasize about, you don't pretend about.
To some, it seems that television usurps play and pretending and dulls the imagination of the child. But is this actually the case?
In talking about any medium, including television, we can't say that one medium is bad and another medium is good, or no medium is good. Every medium has its pluses and its minuses.
Obviously sort of a spectator form of play, but whole society is obsessed with spectator forms of play. The mind is at play much of the time when you're watching TV. You're not working.
In terms of television and imagination, as my colleague at USC, Marcia Kinder, points out, there's a postmodern imagination which takes bits and pieces from different media, including television, and recombines them. And that's certainly something we've seen in our studies. Without television, children tend more to draw on their own experiences, the more unmediated experiences, as the source of imagination. So television changes the source of imagination. If you think it's less imaginative to use television than your own experience, then you would want to say that television is reducing children's creative imagination. On the other hand, if you think it's creative to combine and recombine from the media in the same way that it's creative for children to combine and recombine from their own lives, then we would just say television is changing the source of imagination. While television makes children more imitative of the medium in their fantasy lives, at the same time it develops other cognitive skills.
I think play isn't really about the head, it's about the heart. Normal education is about the head. Knowledge, understanding, skills. It's about tools. And play is about toys, not about tools. It's about toys. And toys are about, well, to use a popular current word, self-esteem. They're about your feelings about yourself and whether you feel this life is worth anything. I can be a mother with these dolls. I can put the dolly to bed. You know, it's not the reality, not the knowledge of how to put a dolly to bed. You wouldn't play with these little things if you cared about how to fix up the sheets, you know. It's got nothing to do with the sheets. It's got to do with you put a bit of Kleenex around for the bed. It's got to do with feeling I can do this. Not I can do it really, but I can do it emotionally. It has to do with the heart, the feeling. It's got to do with character, not mind. Character, not intellect.